and resources and designing/managing product for growth. So you get to learn from global leaders who are creating disruptive products through innovative methods. Let me introduce myself, tell you about our wonderful community, go over some event guidelines, and then finally introduce our speaker. Hello, my name is Ying Yao. I'll be your host today. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a senior UX designer at Honeywell. In my off hours, I'm a design mentor here on ADP List and in the Design Buddies community, as well as the co-organizer for a design community called Ladies That UX Atlanta. What is ADP List? We are a global community for making genuine connections, a platform where people can find, book, and meet mentors from all around the world. Our mission is to foster an inclusive space and support network for designers to come together, learn from each other, and strive to be better. So if you haven't had a chance to check our community out, head over to adplist.org after this event. All right, some of our community milestones that we're super proud of. Since ADP List started, we have grown a bunch. We now have over 3,000 mentors on the platform, leading to over 12,000 one-on-one sessions. We have hosted over 100 events tackling a variety of topics, and a lot of those events are recorded and shared on our YouTube channel. With our platform touching over 70 countries, we're very proud of the global impact we've had on connecting creatives together. Okay, what to expect for this event? This will be recorded. Please no hate speech or discriminatory behavior. As is our tradition, we will be taking a group selfie in just a moment, so be ready for that. And then finally, please share your takeaway on social media by tagging at ADP List and using the hashtag AmazingTogether. We will also be doing a Q&A after the presentation, so I will drop a link in the chat in just a moment for you to submit and vote on the questions that you'd like our speaker to answer. All right, with that, let's do group selfie time. So if you haven't, we welcome you to turn on your cameras, show us your lovely smiles, and then Mashobi will be hitting the camera button.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's, please guys turn on your cameras. Let's see your lovely faces, with your nice pose and your smile. And I'll go ahead and take a picture. Okay, so thank you so much for turning your cameras. So let's hold that pose. 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Okay, and I'll quickly take the next screen in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. And awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Back to you, Ying.
Thank you. Okay, I saw in the chat that someone is unable to hear me. I hope I'm coming in clearly. If not, let me know. Let's try to talk a little bit louder. All right, with that, with our group selfie taken and perfectly framed on our virtual wall, let's get started. So communication might seem like a basic life skill. Presenting design work can be a source of stress for many. How you present your work to stakeholders and non-designers is as important as the designs themselves. The need for designers to develop soft skills is ever increasing as they work with larger and more diverse teams nowadays. So thank goodness that we have Ben George here today to guide us through how we can up our communication skills. So Ben is a staff product designer at Shopify, and he's also had a fascinating career journey where he was self-taught and went on to master his craft by building 0 to 1 initiatives at multiple startups. So Ben, I'll hand it to you to tell us a little bit more about yourself and kick off our event.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Ying Yao. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm super excited to be able to share some things that I may have learned over the years. And I'm actually looking forward to learning a lot from you guys as well. All right, so maybe you can just kick it off. Let me just share my screen and I don't know if you can see it.
I see it.
Awesome. All right. So I know communication is usually a very broad topic. As people, as humans, we are constantly using it every day, whether it is going on a bus or even if you're talking with coworkers and stuff. So let me start with a really, really ancient slide. Any guesses? Actually, I'm accepting chat requests for what this might be. Any guesses? All right, so this thing here is probably one of the oldest undeciphered texts that has been discovered maybe from over 5,000 years ago. Now, this is a super old thing. We still don't know what the secrets that this holds in this kind of inscription. Next, you'll see a kind of an inscription that you're all more familiar with. Slack, yeah. So you've just seen this is very, very common now, like in the remote friendly world that we all are working in. You'll see walls of text, emojis, GIFs, and images and stuff. So today, I'd actually like to talk to you a little bit about just communicating with different people, articulating design decisions. How do you get your point across? I'm Benjamin, and I currently work at Shopify. And yeah, so I'm hopefully I'll be able to share some strategies with you today that you might be able to apply in your day-to-day. Yeah. Okay, so before we dive into what might be good communication in today's work environment, let's maybe take a look at what are the 3 pillars of communication. These are founded really long time back, and Aristotle actually came up with this thing called rhetorical proofs, which are even today considered pillars of communication, persuasion, arguments. The first one is ethos. This is essentially your credibility or your trust, the reason that people should kind of believe what you're saying. Few examples would be a pilot wearing a uniform when you're entering the plane, or a doctor wearing her stethoscope. Those do give you some sort of confidence and trust in the profession that they're doing. The second one is pathos. Again, all of this originate from Greek, and so pathos is the emotional response, getting the audience to feel whatever you're communicating. Now, this could be like a really cool Nike or Apple ad that usually sells a lifestyle more than the product itself. So the third one is logos, and this is your sense of appealing to somebody else's sense of reasoning, sense of logic. So in every interaction that we make in today's day and age, the person we're talking to is constantly evaluating, are we trustworthy or not? Are we reasonable or not? And whatever we're talking about, do they ultimately get a positive or negative experience from it? So these are, let's say, call them benchmarks for good communication. All right, so next we'll talk about a little bit about why great designers are also great communicators. Designers typically lacking the ability or the ability to explain their rationale well will usually be forced to make changes that they disagree with, or stakeholders don't necessarily agree with, just because they are not able to articulate their point of view. And so let's just look at what great designers typically do. Great designers usually impart a lot of knowledge. They usually know what they're talking about. They have a deep expertise in the area that they are talking about, and they can usually be trusted with the solutions that they are building. Great designers also know how to what they want and how to get it done. So they usually they're working in teams. They know how to inspire confidence. They usually have very well thought out arguments and strong opinions, which sometimes are loosely held as well. Great designers can also be very intentional in their approach. They usually have a purpose, a focus behind their reasoning, and it often isn't random. Great designers also listen to understand. So it's not always about communicating your point of view, your approach, your rationale. It's also very important to kind of take in different points of view. And usually some of the great designers I know usually are listening very openly to different points of view to either reduce their own biases or enhance their critical thinking. Great designers are also very, very respectful. They value people's opinions, they value everybody's time, and are often very well prepared. And these are some of the stuff that great designers do. So next, we can take a closer look at what good communication looks like in today's stakeholder environment that we work in. Some of us are working in small companies, some of them are in large companies. So let's just take a deep dive into what does good communication look like. Okay, I'll start with this quick illustration, which kind of encapsulates what communication is all about. So oftentimes there are many things that we want to say, but very few things that the people that we are saying to are interested in. So everything can be represented with Venn diagrams. So this Venn diagram here, we're talking about the intersection, which is relevance. When this overlaps, and the larger the relevance, the more people will start listening to you, the more people will start taking notice, and the more influence you'll eventually have within teams. So it's very crucial to understand, to make conversation and to articulate design points of view through a place of relevance. A lot of people are also very easily distracted. We can blame the general low attention spans that be because of various different things on online that we end up spending our time with. So reducing cognitive load is super crucial because all it takes is one distraction, one lorem ipsum in a maybe a mock-up, or one visual placeholder which did not fit the brand style to derail an entire conversation. So a piece of advice there would be to remove anything that can be considered a distraction to the audience. Next, we'll talk about explaining design rationale, articulating design rationale with non-designers, with stakeholders who may not necessarily come from a design background. It's super crucial to understand and explain problems. That in a design context, it's important to give people enough context about the problem space, the area that you're focusing in, so that they can ultimately help you make good decisions. They know the direction that you're brainstorming in, and they can ultimately help you make a good decision. So once you explain the problem space, next, it's important to talk about the solutions. How did this problem that you're defining, what's the rationale behind the solution that you have come up with? How are they directly related to the problem space that you are exploring? Post that, it's also sometimes important to be very direct in why the solution matters. That's the last part of this graphic, which is trying to explain why the rationale behind your decisions, link them to the problems, and ultimately why they matter in a business context. All of these things inevitably help level up your arguments and whenever you're having conversations with non-designers, whenever you're having conversations with stakeholders, people from business, all of these things definitely help. And in my own personal experience, I've always noticed a difference when I am able to cover all three parts rather than just the problems and the solutions bit. The next part that I'd like to talk about is paying a lot more attention and focusing on the product rather than the process. Most stakeholders likely don't care about the methods, the design methods that were used to come up with a solution, or the process of research that you conducted in order to reach a solution. They care about how the decisions that finally you make, how do they finally impact the product. That's the ultimate end game that everybody is looking for. So one of the most important things that I would consider doing is orienting most of our design sharing towards the product decisions, the business goals, and not the process used to come to that conclusion. However, the caveat being, if somebody were curious about how did you arrive at the conclusion, you should also be able to share those, just that it doesn't have to be the center of your message. Okay. The next one is a very, very talked about term in the designer community, it is about developing empathy. Now, looking at projects, you usually have a lot of perspective when you look at different projects from different perspectives. And if you're listening to understand, you will start looking at them not from a point of defensiveness or being protective of your own ideas. It'll usually come from trying to learn what is it that they are seeing that you're not. Why are they seeing it in that point of view? What's important to that person? And slowly that starts helping everybody kind of improve their own empathy building muscle. So to highlight that, I have a little story. How many of you have heard of the story of the 10 blind men and the elephant? Awesome. Okay, so this is a pretty fun story. I'll just quickly share. So the story goes a little like this. So there were 10 blind men. Each of them were assigned different parts of an elephant. And each person, so for example, one of them was touching the trunk and said, hey, this feels like a snake. Another one was feeling the tail and probably thought, hey, this looks or feels like a rope. Somebody who was feeling the trunk of the elephant was saying that this looks like a spear. This image is almost identical to how we have discussions in the modern workplace now. Most of the time, each different departments in an organization are looking at different things. And that usually means we end up having like a sort of a tunnel vision in the area that we are focusing on, which usually means we might not be able to take a step back and look at the big picture and the direction that we are trying to go, what's more important. And so this is something that it takes a little while to get kind of used to and try to force ourselves to take a step back and look at the big picture. And what is the business or the company or the vision? And this kind of, I've at least personally felt dramatic improvements when I sometimes, I'm okay to make certain compromises for the greater good, for maybe sometimes it's for improved performance, which the engineering team cared about, or sometimes it's for a better experience for customer support teams. So that's something that could be very useful to take away. All right, so next, once we understand, okay, what a broad idea of what good communication looks like in the modern workplace, let's also take a step to understand the kind of stakeholders that you're dealing with. What does your stakeholder landscape look like, if you may? Let's start at the center, which is probably going to be you in an organization. Right around it would be your immediate team, the teams that the people that you interact with on a everyday basis. Beyond that, there will be external stakeholders, people who may not be necessarily involved in your day-to-day, but probably can still influence the projects that you're working on heavily. And beyond that, you have like your executives and leads, people who have influence on the projects, because most likely you would need their approval to move big projects forward. So next, let's try and take each of these different teams and try and break them down and look at them at a closer lens. So the immediate team, the people that you work with, it's very likely going to consist of developers and engineers. So here's what I've noticed that they usually value. They care about minimizing rework. They want to build something once. They care about making sure that the code that they come up with, the code base that they come up with is always efficient, it's maintainable, it's quick performance. They also care about making sure the scope is limited so that the effort is also limited. They don't have to do a lot of work for very little result. As designers, something that we can focus on is understanding the use cases up front, things that will help them understand what are the different edge cases, what can you probably kind of take into consideration upfront, so that then they don't have to make changes later on, probably close to when you're going to be shipping things or when something's broken and stuff like that. We can also look at reusing components and patterns and usually styles and stuff like that, which usually means that you're reducing the number of assets in a app or website. That ultimately helps create a more efficient code base on the developer's end. Also communicating user and business value, which kind of then tells them, oh, you know what, this is probably a very critical business value. Probably it's okay to spend more effort on some initiative versus something else where they can probably push back and say, you know, probably we should use something else, another system. Another group of people that we work with very closely would be product managers and product owners. Things that they value would be user problems. What are the kind of problems that we are focusing on and how do we solve them? Meeting business objectives, strategic initiatives, roadmaps, all of this are big picture vision items that they care about, because they are looking long term, trying to see how can they bring value into the business, into the company in the long term. And the last one will also be shipping things on time, because without shipping things on time, probably the user problems that were there would not go away. Things that we can focus on is what user problem do we prioritize on first? There will obviously be many different types of user problems. It's important for us to understand, you know what, all of them can't be solved magically by waving a wand. So it's important to figure out which ones are important and which ones we can probably do a little bit later. And it's also crucial for us to understand how design decisions can align with the long-term roadmap, long-term business goals. How can we directly impact those? If we understand the core behind this, conversations and convincing product managers become far easier. And shipping on schedule, again, back to reusing patterns and components and ways to kind of make ourselves efficient so that we actually ship on time and we're not creating a new component and a new thing just to be cool. So we're doing it because we have a very strong reason and we're intentional behind it. Now, if you work in an agency or a consultancy company, project managers is somebody that you might be working with on a close basis. Similar to product managers, they also care about timelines and staying on schedule. They care about scope and budget because probably working with clients on external teams. They also care about making sure everybody's in the loop. Things that we can focus on, possible ways to speed up our design work. How can we manage expectations? Let them know, you know, something is not going to be done in the expected time or budget that they have. And third, we might also be looking at proactively giving frequent updates so that they are in the loop, they can communicate with the remaining stakeholders as well. So now let's go into the next group, which is external stakeholders, people that you might not be working with on a everyday basis, but they can still make or break your projects. Some of the teams might look like marketing. So they would usually care about things like brand consistency, using a consistent voice and tone and consistent content guidelines. They also might care about creating a valuable product that ultimately is sellable. These are very important things for marketing, because without that, marketing goals, marketing OKRs are probably not going to be met. Things that as designers we can focus on is creating styles that match the brand. And if it does deviate, being able to explain why. Same thing with content guidelines and tone of voice, using existing content guidelines. If it's not existing, maybe even working with marketing teams to create one so that we can have value down the road. And also using, making sure that the features that we end up designing for the experience, end-to-end experience that we end up building, super important that they actually tie back with solving the real customer pain point, the user pain point, because without that, we might just be doing something, releasing it, not really understanding if it made an impact or not. And that might ultimately lead to people not buying the software, buying the app and the website, right? The next one is customer support. I usually refer to the team as the pulse of the company. So they usually seem to know very nuanced understanding of what are customers talking about, what are the main pain points, where are the opportunities, because they're constantly talking to different types of customers every day. They care about ultimately making sure that the product value is actually valuable to customers. And when something does break, no software is bug free. So when something does break, they also care about making sure the troubleshooting process is super easy and they're actually able to fix issues for customers. Things that we can focus on is connecting designs to customer problems and making sure that the work that we do is usable. It's also bug free. It's super important because the lesser bugs we have, the more usable our product is. If we have done all of the due diligence before, this definitely has an impact later on in the funnel as well. The last team group of people that we end up talking about would be the leads and the execs. They usually are they care about the product, usually from a bird's eye lens that they usually look at projects. They would have a lot of influence in your projects that you work on, probably because they are having a yes or no kind of decision. You'd require their approvals to make decisions along the way. Things that they care about. They care about ultimately growing the business, adding more revenue to the business, and essentially growing the business into a larger entity. They care about strategic alignment between multiple different teams, solving customer problems similar to product managers and customer support as well. They also care about seeing concise info. This is super important because they are constantly switching context almost on an everyday basis, and they probably wouldn't understand all of the nuances that you have working on your project. So it's super important to be able to give them that concise information. So things that we can focus on would be tangible success metrics, things that we can show them. We can show data, qualitative, quantitative, any sort of projections and stuff like that we can show them that say that, hey, you know what, this thing, if we do this, how would it impact the business? What kind of business goals would it impact? How would it move the needle? These kind of stuff is super useful for leads and execs to kind of know when they're looking at a project. It might also help you up prioritize your project because you've been able to communicate that clearly. Demonstrating how the solution maps to strategic initiatives or roadmaps and long-term vision can also help you gain strategic alignments. They might also be a very good set of people that might be able to tell you, you know what, different parts of the company and how they might be able to help and in moving your project forward. Or sometimes there might be already work that is done by another team that you might not be aware of, where they have a high-level picture and they might be able to point you to different teams. Describing solutions through the customer lens. Now, this is a big one because usually when we are talking about problems as a designer, there are other lenses to consider, but the customer lens is ultimately what the flag that we carry, right? Like the users and talking about the users and being able to fight the case for ultimate users, which will inevitably improve the user experience. And for concise info, it's just getting to the point quickly. So these are some of the things that this group of people care about. Now, if you have just, let's say, 5 takeaways that you needed to take away from this talk, I like to keep it simple. So if there was just 5 things that you're going to take away from this talk, this is what it would be. Empathy for everyone, not just for users. So this is, we constantly are talking about, empathy for users and how it's important to be user-driven, user-centric, being kind and patient and developing empathy for your co-workers and stakeholders, and not just for the users you're designing for, is paramount. As designers, we usually tend to over-amplify the empathy for users. I don't mean to reduce that, but just try to be more empathetic towards co-workers. It can take you a long way. second one would be speaking their language. Be relevant, speak their language. You might consider many things that are important to you, but first it's also important to ask yourself if this thing that you're talking about is going to be important to the person listening to that conversation, to that discussion. If it is, you might be able to come and speak from a place of relevance, and you'll be so surprised how conversations open up, and you're able to have a lot more meaningful conversation just because you're able to speak their language. Being direct, remove fluff. I'm a firm believer of the no BS thing. I usually prefer being direct and concise, and this I've noticed goes a long way, especially with execs and leads and people who are in strategy. They usually prefer to kind of get the information and just avoid beating around the bush. It kind of saves everybody time, and they'll respect you for it. Understanding relationships is another one. As humans, the better you understand relationships, professional relationships, the more you can actually have influence within the team, within the org, because you understand relationships, you understand like how you might be able to influence different parts of the projects, what parts of the projects are important, what's important to different people, why are those things important to somebody else and not to you. So you might be able to find out a lot about people, and that might be able to also help you level up in your career and also be able to move the needle on projects. The last one is not the least, but this is something that I regularly find myself debating internally, is recharging trust. Doing things that that'll help you build rapport and trust within the team. Because if people don't trust you, nothing else will follow, because most of the time they'll be questioning the decisions and maybe challenging your decisions because they don't trust you. And as a people, we generally, it's one of those innate things that we have within ourselves. So it's important to understand that trust is a factor in moving projects forward and also helping make decisions. So another thing that you might want to think about is trust is not a one-time thing. It's not like this one activity that you did and you know what, I've reached a 7 out of 10 trust. It's never like that. Usually trust is a regular ongoing thing, and you'll need to find ways to regularly recharge it, because the more you're able to recharge it, the more influence you might be able to have, the more people will be able to trust, and actually you might come across as a lot more confident designer when you're conversing with other people, other stakeholders as well. So that's it. Any questions?
Thank you. I was like jotting down a bunch of questions as well that we can get to, but that was amazing, jam-packed full of information. And I was hoping like Deepa should start screenshotting. These are great slides to reference back to. Okay, all right, let's get to the Q&A, and we have, I believe, a healthy amount of time to get to them. Let's see. Okay, the first one is from Mel. They had asked, what's the best way to present user-centric designs to stakeholders who are only interested in the business?
Very interesting question. I think like this is kind of like a double-edged sword. You may be interested in the user-centric nature of designs, while they might be interested in the business side of things. And it's a very difficult ask when you want to talk to, let's say, business stakeholders about user-centric, because they don't necessarily see the connection between how user-centric might actually drive business value. So first, it might be important to break the ice between helping them understand how this might actually drive business value. And some of the strategies that have worked for me in the past is if there is, let's say, some sort of quantitative data, something that you can show. Usually people who care about business also care about numbers and statistics and stuff like that. So if you have existing data points that you can share along with the user-centric arguments. This sometimes drives a better discussion, also a better ask when you kind of say, you know what, this is the user problem. This is how much of a problem this is, because X number of people or X percentage of people are struggling with this. And that's why we are not, let's say, people aren't getting onboarded, which means no acquisition or low acquisition. Now that's something that they're able to clearly see how the user-centric nature and how maybe improving the onboarding can actually help with the overall funnel. Does that answer your question?
I think so. The next one that we had was, what's the best way to recharge trust between designers and non-designers?
Okay, so trust is a very, very invisible thing. You know, it's not something that you can ever see. Okay, this person trusts me, but when you know that a person trusts you, usually their decisions and the language and the body language usually speaks for themselves. So some of the things that I feel builds trust usually leans on non-work related things first. If you're new in the organization, if you are new into a team, or somebody new has joined the team and stuff like that, trust, I think, usually is built first from having real conversations with people. One-on-ones is one of the things that I found to be quite useful to build trust. We usually are ending up sharing things that are important to us, career growth, why it matters to us, where do we see ourselves in the future, 3 months from now, 6 months from now. And when you're kind of able to be a little vulnerable, talk about why it matters to you and how you might probably be able to help somebody else, that kind of opens up the conversation. People might, and even better than just the conversation, actually doing something that you had in a conversation could actually say that, you know, this person actually cares about my, let's say, career growth more than just words. And that's some of the best mentors that I've had usually put action to words. They usually go out and maybe sometimes find me a course that early on in my career, they found me a course that I ended up doing. And that built trust. And, you know, I started thinking that this mentor actually cares about my growth and my career trajectory. So those are the kind of stuff that could build trust. Sometimes it might be starting with building rapport, getting to know the person behind what they do in their jobs. They are more than just a developer or a designer or product manager. They might have a lot of interests and hobbies. Rapport slowly over time can also build trust.
I like that. There's so many multiple opportunities outside of just like the official meeting where you can build that rapport.
Right.
With non-designers. You can, you know, set up casual, like a coffee chat, just to like, hey, let's just get to know each other. Like, what are you focusing on? How's your day going? What are some ways that I can help? Or I've also found what's worked well is like I sometimes observe, like I sit in on like meetings that necessarily aren't design centric, just to observe. And I think having that person there that's like, oh, this designer cares about this business centric or product meeting or this engineering meeting as well as a familiar face. And now they have context, then I can reach out to them if I have a question, we want to collaborate on a problem together. So I think it's also, I know it's kind of hard when we're all working remote, but there's always like opportunities to reach out to someone and it's like, hey, can I sit in on a meeting? Or like, hey, can we chat? I'm new. I'd like to get to know you if we're working together on this project, to start building that rapport.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Okay, next one is, what is the best way to find out how often you should communicate to your stakeholder? So frequency of communication.
The frequency, I'd say, is one more than what was expected, or one more than necessary. It's
One more.
essentially because communication is a very precarious thing. I usually, especially in today's, let's say, remote working, it's very easy to get zoned in, work in our under a cave and not necessarily communicate. And so I generally feel like sometimes over communicating things, even if you don't have, let's say, a deliverable or an artifact to present, but just talking about, you know what, I was stuck with this part, and I was for the better part of today, I was trying to wrangle this problem. And usually I've noticed that you don't have to do everything on your own. This is something that I personally struggle with as well, trying to spend some time and, like, twist complicated problems and try to solve them. But I've realized, like, sometimes just sharing, this is what I'm struggling with. This was two options that I tried, and not really solutions, but two thought experiments that I actually tried going a little bit deep. It didn't work out. And sometimes, like a customer support person, or maybe somebody from engineering will suddenly jump up and say, oh, by the way, you know what, have you tried this? And that suddenly opens up a new line of thinking that I didn't have before. And so those are some of the benefits that happen when you just share thinking docs outside of your mind, right? So sometimes just type it up and send them, like, what are you currently working on? What are you kind of thinking of? Those kind of stuff I've noticed have dramatically improved the speed at which I come up with some end solutions, and actually that we ship. Also, I tend to rely on over communicating rather than under communicating. Yeah.
I like that. Like, the plus one, how I saw it in my mind was like when you have like a verbal communication with somebody, you can always follow up with like an email or like notes or like a message as well, just to like confirm understanding. And it reminds me of the circles that you showed of, like, if it's your immediate team, then the frequency is probably going to be higher. You guys are working closely together, and it's like higher or further out, a little bit less frequent. But like you said, you want to make those less frequent ones very concise, very clear, less about the process and more about like key kind of takeaways or insights. I know what's helped me is like setting reminders on my work calendar of like, hey, you should probably send out like a weekly update to like your team or my team or my leadership, just to let them know, like, this is what I'm working on this week, and this is what I anticipate I'll be prioritizing next week as well. And that way you get like a running backlog that your team or your manager can always refer back to. And it just makes it easier to know your current status, where you're working on. Like you said, I don't see a downfall to over communication unless it's kind of like a stakeholder that's like way out, that doesn't need to know all of the context.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of, I think, asynchronous communication. People can read what's relevant to them and skip out or not read the things that aren't. So usually I like to start with like a TLDR on the top, kind of like front loading in journalism. So kind of this is what I'm going to be talking about in more detail. If people find that it's going to be relevant to them, they go ahead and read the details. Otherwise, they just move on.
Yes, I think I recently learned that too, where it's like you want to put the takeaways up at the top, and sometimes you want to write in a way that's kind of a little bit like, I don't know, incendiary, or like kind of grabs your attention. So then people will stick around and like, okay, I want to hear what happened. Like, how do we get to this conclusion? Especially when it comes to like research, you want to say like, hey, if we don't prioritize X, Y, and Z, we anticipate this isn't going to impact our business by this amount. I'm like, okay, you have my attention. I want to hear how it's impacted by that, how we led to that conclusion. It's kind of, I guess it's kind of like applying kind of clickbaity to stuff to your presentations or your communication style, but it kind of works, right? It grabs your attention, especially with how busy people can be. It's like, all right, tell me how this impacts me, and then I'll choose to stick around.
Yeah, I think that the saddest part that can happen to research is like all the hard work has been put in, but it's just living inside a doc somewhere. Nobody's reading it. So
we gotta distill those insights, all that hard work.
Yeah.
Okay, next one. This is from Abel. How do we reduce conflicts when taking design decisions or talking design decisions? I guess like conflict and communication when we're talking about design rationale and taking action on it.
Okay, so this one is like a little broad because it depends on what kind of conflicts. because the kind of conflicts I think matters to how you might, or kind of strategies that you might apply to kind of yeah. So I don't know. I don't know if there's a silver bullet to handle all kinds of conflicts. Maybe whoever wrote this could share a little bit more about more context about this.
Yeah, Abel, if you can write it in the chat, some additional conflicts, but maybe what was it? I can think of like a conflict is not aligning on like what you would recommend the design decision is, or like maybe you have to, someone else thinks like we need to deprioritize something so that we can meet this business goal, or it's less complexity for engineering to develop, so that can lead to a conflict. So it's how do you kind of resolve that when you're having this like live discussion going on, and you're fighting for the user, but also you got to take in feedback from everyone else.
Yeah, actually, this is a good question. So in this particular context, I feel like conflict is usually not a full stop. It's a starting point. So usually if somebody is debating or conflicted with your rationale, your point of view, it usually means that they care about something else. So I think it might be important first to uncover what that, put on the researcher cap, try and uncover what is it that they care about. Why are they rejecting a certain idea? Maybe there might be legitimate concerns. Maybe that idea was not feasible in the time frame that they had. Maybe it took a lot of, let's say, engineering effort, or a lot of effort in general. Or maybe something else, maybe legal reasons and stuff like that. You can't probably do that. So I think it's important to uncover, and that uncovering is kind of part of the start of the process, where you're trying to uncover and say, what, you found out 3-4 different reasons. What are the most important reasons? Which means that you might end up coming up with some sort of a compromise where their main reason is not hindered, while some of the user-centric conversations that you want to drive forward is also you're able to have.
It's a good point. Like conflict is not necessarily bad all the way, right? If everything is completely like smooth after you communicate your designs or your proposals, and everyone's quiet and everyone accepts it, you're living in a very like alternate reality, right? People are going to have questions because they're in a different role than you, and their priorities are mostly aligned with what you're trying to do. But sometimes it's like they need more information, or they want to know how this is going to impact their priorities. So I like what you said, where it's like it's the start of a conversation, right? As well as like, I've also have to learn that conflict is not something that I should take personally, right? I am more than the work that I create, and being able to talk through like conflict discussions and align on something is an amazing skill set or amazing experience to go through repeatedly, right? You get better and sharper, and it can also lead to like maybe less questions in the future, where it's like you can, if you speak to it during your presentation or your talk, then you get to at the end kind of dig into more of like the meatier, deeper questions that you get from the audience too. It can lead to like better discussions.
Yep. And I think on the flip side, if you're actively listening to this particular point of view, and you now have one more let's say a point of view to add to your arsenal. So the next time you have like a conversation with like a engineer or developer, and you put forth that kind of an argument, or maybe a similar kind of argument, so automatically trust is going to go up, because you're now starting to look at a lens bigger than just design. You're looking at other stakeholder lenses as well.
Exactly. Okay. I'm gonna ask one of the questions I had, which was when you have a mix of stakeholders in a meeting, different roles, different, I guess, maybe spheres, how do you balance, how you communicate your designs? Because it's not like you can speak to everybody perfectly.
Sure. Yeah, this is one of the harder parts to deal with, because one of the things that I like to do is not present big projects for the first time in a meeting room. Usually, like if there's like 3 different stakeholders, I actually send these things to the 3 different type of stakeholders to kind of get the broad sense of their thinking before that big meeting. So when I end up doing this, what I used to do this, like, where I work all week, and then the Friday I go and present something, and then I have, like, 2 slides in and lots of conversations because they haven't seen this thing. And so usually a 10 or 15 or 20 slide thing ends at 5 because so many conversations and we run out of time. So like a technique that I ended up coming up with was sharing it with all of those people individually, or, like, let's say team wise in certain Slack channels, and have them process this information, have them take the time to also review the information and give some of their concerns, ideas, and stuff like that to you. And when you're presenting it, they are also a little bit more aligned on the direction. So if something was like a big no, a big red flag, you've already caught it in one of your previous individual or independent reviews. And then when you kind of present it into a room, more or less the conversation kind of is aligned. Obviously, there might be new things that somebody spoke in the conversation that sparked a conversation. And those are some things that, you can take some time to process, I guess.
That's awesome. So doing the prep work beforehand of just like, hey, I want to reach out to you early on because I want to, your input is very valuable. I want to make sure I catch anything that's like glaring or an issue before I present to the wider audience. And like, I think people, it's really appreciate that you're reaching out to them one-on-one because you recognize their input is really valuable, and it kind of, like, you're right, it minimizes any type of I guess unaccounted for, disturbances, or like you get to actually go through the rest of the presentation because everyone is aligned.
Yeah, and so it took me a while to understand this because I used to imagine presentations. So I was influenced and inspired by presentations from some of the best conferences in the world. Like, I'm not, and then I realized, like, I'm not actually releasing the next iPhone, and I don't need to do a mic drop moment. It's more about being a little bit more strategic and figuring out some concerns early. And then we can tackle the rest as they come along, I guess.
Good point. Okay. Next one we have is, what is the most valuable thing that a designer can deliver to non-designers? I think you spoke to that too, of value depends on the role of that person, right? So it's understanding what they are, what they value, and then how that translates to how you communicate to them. So for product owner, it's how does that tie to the business goal? If it's engineering, it's how does that affect complexity? Can we reuse any design into patterns or components to reduce rework, but still kind of deliver that optimal experience? Anything else you want to add to that? Like, depends on the role.
Yeah, I think it depends. A lot of it depends on the role, and you covered most of it, which is everything else here.
Okay. And see, another one I wanted to ask was, for you, in terms of your career growth, how has your communication style or process changed throughout your career? Have you noticed any like differences, growth patterns, pivots?
So I think I started off at a design agency, so where it was kind of like a design-led agency. And so when I started my career, like UX was just picking up, and people were having a lot more conversations about being user-centered and stuff like that, at least in the Indian ecosystem. And so I remember at that point, we used to focus very, very strongly on the design lens, things that might be functional, things that might be delightful, things that might actually be aesthetic, those kind of stuff, and very strongly hold on to those principles and guidelines and some of the patterns that we have understood, some of the behaviors that we've learned. Over time, I've started realizing that there isn't one answer, or there isn't just one way out. I think it's a very iterative process, and It's never going to be this one thing that we release and we're done. We can move on to the next project. Usually, it's going to be very. Oops, sorry, that's my dog. Yeah, so it's going to be very iterative, and I've realized that being able to focus on that kind of helps, because then each decision that you're making, you're also kind of putting it in the bigger lens. This is an experiment. How do you kind of calculate for this experiment? How do you kind of align various teams and different people to the experiment? And so, yeah, that's some of the stuff.
Nice. So just it's gonna grow as you go throughout your career, and it's kind of a process that you experiment with. You're gonna learn more. You're gonna add to it, but there's never one like master communication style or process that's gonna work for every situation.
Yeah, and if there were, people would be using it, and everybody would end up becoming master communicators. So
That's
it's not
true. That'd be too easy. Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question. Let's see. How do you influence and communicate design decisions to engineers without any UX knowledge? So I guess if those, I don't know if they're saying if the developers don't have minimal or no UX knowledge, how do you communicate design decisions to them or your design rationale?
To reframe the problem, I would say, how would engineers communicate to you engineering concepts or rationale behind development to a designer with very low development concepts or development knowledge? It's both of them kind of you can tackle the exact same way. Most decisions, I feel like if they follow some form of logical sequence or logical flow, if that logic caters to the other person's if they're able to understand the logic that you've applied, most of it almost becomes obvious. So if an engineer is able to communicate, we need to choose one framework over the other, because ultimately the performance is going to be faster, which is a good thing. Sure, that makes logical sense, and I might go ahead with that decision. Same way, like if a designer were to talk to an engineer, just saying that, let's think of an example. Just saying that X percentage of users face this problem, or 8 out of 10 users face a certain problem, might be okay for that 8 out of 10 users that we're talking about. But how does that maybe work out in the bigger picture? Why should the engineer care if the 8 people experience that problem? What's in it for them? Those kind of conversations to be able to uncover can help you have a better conversation. But I'm sure if you're able to have an argument, like a conversation where you're able to convince people that, this problem is big because of a certain reason. And if you're able to put that into a logical sequence of events, and if that makes sense, most people would be okay, or they might even have clarifying questions, or they might have other tips and stuff like that you can add to strengthen your argument. But I think that it is important to understand what's in it for them first.
That makes sense. And I think like having that conversation kind of offline, or like not in like an official meeting, kind of one-on-one with that engineer at first, to kind of bring up that problem that you have, where it's like, hey, it's affecting this many people. And I know that we're probably not the first team or company to kind of tackle this. And I've seen these other ways that it's been executed. What do you think about like how we can start working towards this? We're kind of making it open, right? Instead of like, I've designed it this way, it needs to be this way. That's not kind of opening the door to a conversation. It's like, hey, I'm kind of facing this problem. I understand that. And I think I've designed it in the way that it's going to minimize complexity and we get to reuse certain components. But I'd like to understand more nuance from you, or what do you think? Maybe we can do it a different way, right? It's more of like an open-ended question than like, yes or no, right? As well as, probably not doing that or I don't know, maybe it's a working session with multiple engineers and designers in the room, but it's being open to that feedback and not jumping to conclusions about like, oh, it's a yes or a no immediately.
Yeah, I feel like yes or no usually is needed in only certain decision-making kind of scenarios, decision-making kind of meetings. But for the most part, usually binaries, yes or no, comes across as very close-ended meetings, close-ended brainstorming sessions, even like for research questions and stuff like that. Usually, you don't want to have like yes or no because it doesn't inspire more conversations, more discussions around that particular subject.
It's good. We want to have an ongoing conversation. Okay, with that, we are a little bit after time, so we unfortunately have to bring it to a close. We still have a little bit of leftover questions, and I've shared the link with Ben too, so maybe he'll either maybe set up a follow-up session or a group session and answer them, or maybe he'll share out some answers on his social media. But I want to thank you all for joining us today on our tech series event. We had really good questions coming in, and we learned so much from our awesome speaker for taking the time to share his knowledge with us. Please find him on ADP List. I was trying to actually like find your mentor link. I was having trouble. But yeah, Ben is a mentor and ADP List. If you like to have a follow-up conversation with him, kind of see how you can improve your communication area skills in a specific area, please, oh, there it is. Please reach out to him as well. And with that, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks so much.
And I want to let you all know that, so this is our, for this year, our last Tech Hustle event. We will resume in the new year on January. So we'll have a break in December, and hopefully we will get to see you in our next event in January. With that, thank you all for joining us, organizers. And Ben, if you can stick around, we'll do a quick retro at the end. Everyone else, have an awesome, safe rest of your day or evening or night, and we'll see you next time.